It's not every day we have a best-selling author here on the Family History Show. Stick around. It's going to be one of my favorites. It's going to be a fantastic hour. So welcome to the Family History Show, everybody. It's a place where family history fans and history fans come together to enjoy each other's company, learn new things, and delve deeper into history to understand not just our family stories, but also wider stories from history as well. My name is Ellie. I'm Marketing Content Manager at Findmypast, and we have a really special guest with us today. I'm very, very excited. Everybody, you can probably see her now, but I'm just going to introduce her. We have Kate Mosse, OBE, best-selling author of the Joubert Family Chronicles and the Long Dog trilogy, amongst many, many others, as well as Warrior Queens and Quiet Revolutionaries, and her upcoming first foray into young adult feminist history for every day of the year, which I have next to me, and we will talk about more in a little bit. Welcome, Kate. Thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Ellie. Lovely to be here, and hello to all of you who are coming in. Well, if you're in Sussex, it's very sunny outside, so thank you for coming into your computer screens.
Yes, thank you so much. Now, your CV, your career is absolutely extensive, and I have not touched on it, absolutely have not touched on everything in the space of 20 seconds. What have I missed? If people don't know who you are, which would be surprising to me, what do they need to know?
Well, I mean, they need to know actually nothing, because what matters is if they're interested in what I'm saying now. But for reasons of answering your question, I'm in my 60s. I worked in publishing when I first left university, having read English. I am the founder director of the Women's Prize for Fiction and the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction. And all of my fiction and non-fiction and plays and activism has been about shining a spotlight on women's experiences and telling history from a 360-degree point of view, not taking the lovely men out of history, but putting women back into history where we always were, because it's the writing of history that's often left women out. And my new book that Ellie mentioned, Feminist History for Every Day of the Year, is aimed at 14 to 18-year-olds, and it just celebrates 366 incredible women and some essays around that, about things that you might want to think about as a young person, or indeed the carer of a young person, or as I am, the grandparent of a young person. And I do lots of other bits and pieces, both locally, Sussex. I'm a Sussex girl, born and bred, but I'm associated with Carcassonne in the southwest of France, where many of my novels, historical adventure novels, are set. And I also am a trustee of the British Library. I am the president of the Festival of Chichester, and I'm a visiting professor in contemporary fiction and creative writing at the University of Chichester. And actually, Ellie, I have a CBE now, not an OBE.
CBE? Oh, excuse me.
I was bumped upstairs by the king.
Amazing. But as for anybody who's listening, this is why, as I said, Kate's experience and her career is long and extensive, and you can just see why that she's been honoured in such a way. I'm absolutely delighted to have you with us today. And as you mentioned, you are the founder for the Women's Prize for Fiction and for Non-Fiction, of which Findmypast are very, very proud to be the sponsor for the Non-Fiction Prize. Very, very exciting.
A founding sponsor, indeed. You know, you were part of being able to set the prize up in the first place. So it's why, obviously, it's a great delight for me to be here to do this with Findmypast, because you've played a huge role in the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction. And it's incredibly important that women's voices in non-fiction are heard, particularly at the moment where we're living in time of misinformation and disinformation. So properly researched, thorough, incredible narrative non-fiction by women who know what they're talking about. We have to shine a spotlight on that as well.
Absolutely. And I'm correct me if I'm wrong, is it a big anniversary for the Women's Prize? Is it this year or is it next year?
This year was the 30th of the Women's Prize for Fiction, the 30th winner. The numbers look a bit weird because it was obviously 1996 and everybody was going, hang on, that's not 30 years, but it is the 30th winner, of course, because the first year has a winner. So that was great. And the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction, we just awarded the second winner. And the other anniversary is Discoveries, which many of you might know is our huge mentoring and new writers program for fiction. And that celebrates its 5th anniversary this year. So there are many things going on in the Women's Prize world and the Women's Prize Trust. And anybody who's interested, just go onto the Women's Prize website and you'll see all sorts of things there, the ways you can get involved and support, and also lots of advice about writing, and indeed very pertinent to Findmypast researching and how you go about tracking a story down, which of course is what Findmypast does.
Absolutely. And speaking of tracking a story down, a couple of months ago, I went into our newspapers, speaking about the Women's Prize, and I went and had a look at what people were talking about when it was founded. And it was very amusing, but also very infuriating to me to read some of the commentary. I'll have to share some of them with you. I'm sure they will infuriate you even more. But by the by, we have my colleague Liam in the comments with us today. So do say hi to him. He will be able to pop any relevant links into the chat. So if you want to go and check anything out about the Women's Prize, you can do that. If you want to find out where you can buy Kate's books, you can do that too. I do also want to mention, I have mentioned to you this before, but I thought that our lovely audience might like to know. When I was at university studying for my master's degree, I did my master's in crusading history. With a chap called Professor Jonathan Phillips at Royal Holloway University. And I had no idea of his connection to you. And I was waxing lyrical about your Long Dog books and saying how much I love them, how much they inspired me to actually research about the Albigensian Crusade a little bit more. And he said, well, I know her. Would you like me to I could get your book signed. So he took my stack of books, took them to you. You very kindly signed them for me, and then he returned them to me. It was very nice of him, and it was very nice of you as well.
He is a lovely, he's a lovely man. For those of you who don't know him, Professor Phillips, but he, the reason that we know each other is just one of those wonderful things about the world of the arts, about publishing, about book festivals, about how there is this creative support and community that builds up over years and years and years and years and years. And when I used to have a book show on BBC4, when it first launched, I had a book show called the Readers and Writers Roadshow. And he was one of the guests talking about his book on the Fourth Crusade. I think it was that book in particular. And I said, well, actually, I'm writing a novel about the Albigensian Crusade. It's called Labyrinth. It's set in the southwest of France. And there was no indication that it was going to be a book that lots of people read at that stage. You know, it was just very much a glint in my eye. And he said, well, actually, I don't really know anything about the Cathars or much about the Albigensian Crusade, but, you know, if there's anything I can do to help. So when I'd written a first draft, I said, well, you know, have a look at this, you know, just to make sure that I haven't made any absolute howlers about broader medieval history. And he did. And we've been friends ever since. It's kind of more than 20 years now. So it's lovely. It's very lovely, these things. And then to discover that you were a student of his, it's one of the great things about growing older, actually, that you see these different stories. You see, you know, it was the 20th anniversary of Labyrinth this year, and I did a one-woman tour around the UK in the spring. And many of the people who came were mothers and daughters, or fathers and daughters and sons. And the younger people would say, well, you know, my mum always talked about this book, or my mum was reading your novel when she was pregnant with me. And it's just a wonderful thing about age. You know, I like getting older and I like these stories. So it's been this lovely connection between you and me, and Jonathan is very much to be celebrated.
I agree. It's one of my favorite anecdotes. And it's just a pleasure to be able to chat to you, basically. So if any of you do have any questions for Kate, please do add them into the comments, whether you'd like to know about her research process, maybe some fun finds when she's been researching, maybe when she's been doing family history, or maybe writing tips, anything like that, ask away. We will try and get to as many as we possibly can. But until then, it's host's privilege that I get to ask my questions. So my first question for you, Kate. Given this extensive career that you have, how did you said earlier that you started off in publishing. How did you move from that into writing?
I didn't know what I wanted to do when I left university. I read English, and being of the age that I am, all young women started in entry jobs as secretaries. The boys didn't, but the girls did. Nowadays, everybody types. That kind of thing is a thing of the past and good. But in those days, it didn't matter where you'd gone to university, what kind of degree you'd got, or what you might want to do. It was kind of that automatic thing. And I had done a secretarial course, and I was sent as what they called a temporary secretary to a publishing company, Hodder and Stoughton. And my job was to be on reception and to do any typing that any of the editors needed and all of these kind of things. And in those days, there was less attempt to make jobs accessible to anybody, if you like. So somebody was leaving and one of the editors came down and said, oh, my secretary's going to leave. Do you want a job? And I didn't know what I was going to do. So I said, okay. So I found myself working in publishing and enjoyed it enormously because, you know, truthfully, if I'd ever been asked what I could do or been asked to put something on my passport, I would have put reader. And I was trying to work out a way of how I could be a job that involved me just reading all the time. Of course, there isn't not really any such job as that, but publishing is close to that. But there came a moment, I'd had my first child, I was pregnant with my second child, I was part of a group that would go on to found the Women's Prize for Fiction. And I was offered a very big job in publishing, and I was the main breadwinner in the family, and I had to think very hard, because essentially I knew that if I took that job, I was saying that what I wanted from my career was to be the CEO of a publishing company, that I would be committing to publishing as my career. And I knew that isn't what I wanted. And so I swallowed very deeply and talked to my husband about it. And he said, you must do what you want to do. And so I turned the job down. At the same time, I was expecting my second child, and I was terrible at being pregnant, and it didn't suit me at all. And I said to a friend of mine who was a literary agent, you know, the book I wanted to read when I was pregnant with my daughter still isn't there. And now I'm pregnant again, and the book I want. And he said, well, why don't you stop moaning and write it? And I kind of thought, okay, I will, in a moment, because I suddenly didn't have a job apart from anything else. And he sold that book, the idea of the book, which is, it's called Becoming a Mother. And it's very much about the emotional and the social and the political aspects of going from being somebody without children to being somebody with children. So it's not a how-to, you'll be this fat and you need to eat this, or you need to have these tests. It's very much about, I interviewed lots of other women. And so I kind of fell into writing. And then I wrote another nonfiction book, and I wrote 2 novels because somebody asked me to do it. But truthfully, the reason that I became a writer, and this will be understandable to everybody who's here today, because we all have a shared love of history, and particularly of family history, and telling the stories of ordinary people rather than just the kings and the queens and the generals, the people like us, was going right back in 1989 to a place called Carcassonne in the southwest of France, and falling in love with the history of the region, the medieval history of a group of so-called heretical Christians, the Cathars, discovering that, 800 years ago, the Cathars had female priests, that they were, I would say, a very early and much more honest form of Christianity than was developing in the medieval period in France, where the Catholic churches were seen as corrupt and licensed to print money, if you like, and priests who said one thing and did another thing. And this new religion, it wasn't a new religion, of course, it has things in common with Manichaeism right back into the 2nd century Persia, all of this. But nonetheless, it was a dualist Christian theology. And the combination of place and this extraordinary history that you will understand, Ellie, as someone who is a specialist in crusading history, just propelled me to start writing something different. And for the first time, I thought, oh, this matters. And so I always think that I'd written 4 books, but it was going to Carcassonne and writing Labyrinth that made me a writer. That was when it shifted.
Gosh, I've got goosebumps just listening to you talk about that. What you said as well about when you wrote the book, when you were pregnant, and you were told sort of write the book you want to read. I see that sort of like doing the rounds a lot as well, because if you're not interested in your book, then you're not gonna pour that passion into it and that energy into it that it needs to take shape and take form. You know, writing a book is an immensely personal thing, I think, and you have to have the energy and the will and the want to do it. So if you don't want to write it, I don't know. But yeah, also
I think you're absolutely right, Ellie, and you put it correctly by saying, you know, about writing something that you're passionate about. I don't think that you should write what you know. I think that suits some people, but for other people like me, it is the curiosity that drives the storytelling. It's, you know, I didn't know anything about the Cathars of the Southwest France, and I wanted to. When I was writing the Joubert Family Chronicles, which is the Huguenot diaspora from the wars of religion in France from 1562 on for the next few hundred years, I didn't know anything about the Huguenot diaspora, really. And I wanted to learn. So for me, the inspiration is about place, first and foremost, always place. But then that idea of learning something. And obviously, many people who read my books are passionate about history. They have the same curiosity that you have and that I have and Jonathan Phillips has and all of our friends and tutors and the people who write the books that we enjoy to read. But as you say, it's about the passion to share that knowledge as well. When people say to me, I couldn't put your books down, that is the biggest compliment. If they say to me, oh, now I know a lot about the Cathars, I think, oh, well, that's good. I want people to learn a lot about the Cathars, but it's got to be the story that grabs them. It's got to be the passion for the place in the story that grabs people.
Absolutely. And speaking of the Joubert Family Chronicles, the final book is now out in paperback in the world, which is very exciting. And the series in paperback is now complete.
It's now complete.
Yeah. How does that feel? And for anybody who's not familiar with the series, I know you touched on it just there, but what can you tell us about the Joubert Family Chronicles?
It's an epic adventure saga, really, telling a 300 years story of a feud between two families, one Catholic, one Huguenot, that's just to say the French Protestants, over the outbreaks of the wars of religion in France, through the diaspora of Huguenot people taking sanctuary all over the world, in England, but particularly in the last book, the one that's just out now, if anybody wants to get it, A Map of Bones, which is set all in South Africa, because a handful of Huguenot refugees found their way to South Africa in the 17th century. And those names are very present still today in South African society, Joubert, of course, being one of the most well-known names. But any of you who have been watching the athletics will have been seeing a South African field athlete, Duplessis, another Huguenot name. And so, again, for me, it's about unpicking those stories. It's about everybody who's ever tried to trace their own family tree or is interested in family history. I think my very beloved cousin Anne might be on this call today. I think she might be joining us, and she and I are both very interested in our family history. And anyone who knows how hard it is sometimes to investigate even your own family will know that whether it's me as a historical novice, a professional novelist writing history and fiction, or anybody who's listening today doing their own family tree, we all know that we are detectives. It's about following clues, particularly if you're looking into women's history, because often women's names don't appear, their names are lost. One of the brilliant pieces of research that many of you will know about that Findmypast did was about all the women who were missing from family trees, 38 million women missing from family trees. It was an extraordinary piece of research that you at Findmypast did. And of course, we know that they're there because there's a man who's named and there are children, but she is invisible. She's essentially wife or the person who has had the children, the mother. And so that's what I love about all of these things. And so the Joubert Family Chronicles was very much following those links of one family and another family and their intersections all of the years. And of course, in a way, of course, it could fail to be anything else but this, a refugee story, because the Huguenots were refugees. They were forced through no fault of their own to flee and leave behind their lands and had to make new homes for themselves elsewhere. And of course, many came to England, many went to the New World, that's to say Virginia and America. Of course, many went to the Holy Roman Empire, that's to say Germany. But the ones that I followed, this family, are a little cluster of about 200 or so Huguenots who made their home in the end in South Africa. So it's been wonderful writing it. I think readers expect me to be more bereft than I am, because truthfully, when you're writing stories, you are thinking about how to finish them and making sure that your readers who followed these characters all the way through, Minu and Piet and their family and their descendants, that you give the readers the ending that they deserve and my characters the ending that they deserve. So actually what I felt was a great sense of relief that the story was over, a great sense of fulfillment that I had told these 300 years of storytelling. Of course, I felt a little, these people have been with me for 8 years of writing, 12 years of research. But in fact, what it does, Ellie, when you finish a big project like this, is it suddenly gives you room again to dream of all the other books that are yet to come. And when you're writing a series, you are kind of committed to it. So you can't let yourself dream of all these other things. So that's what's joyous now. I'm in the research for my next big book, and it's wonderful kind of having a blank slate in a funny sort of way.
Do you suffer from what I sometimes like to call shiny new project syndrome?
Yes, of course, because I think that bubble of excitement in your stomach and the kind of twinkle in your eye when you're embarking right at the beginning. And so at that stage, everything is new and everything is exciting. And my next new big novel will be, we haven't announced it yet, so I can't tell you much about it, but it will be a Norman labyrinth, essentially. And I will be building on my own family history. We know that the earliest Mosse that we know of, it was a family de Mosse, came across in the army of William the Conqueror. And the novel will be set partly in the present day and partly in 1064 to 1067, in England and in France. So it will be, going backwards and forward. So at the moment, everything that I'm reading is brand new, shiny, exciting information. Of course, by the time I start writing properly, it will be, oh no, what happened then? Hold on, I've got this bishop confused with that bishop. But at this stage, everything has equal weight, if you like. And that's what the shiny syndrome that you so rightly say. And it's, as you know, Ellie, it's a lovely position to be in. And it's like anybody listening who reads history or reads fiction will have exactly that same thing. You've been saving it up. Everybody's gone home, the children, the grandchildren, your responsibilities, your friends, whatever it is, you're home from work, and you sit down with a cup of tea or a glass of wine in your kitchen on the sofa on a Friday night. You've got no commitments. And you open that brand new book. And if you're naughty like me, you break the spine. And if you're somebody who's very careful, you do that, but that's not very relaxing. So everybody who is a reader knows that feeling too, that being at the very beginning of a new adventure. And that's what it feels like when you're writing.
Do you mind if we take a quick question?
No, you ask away.
From the audience. Okay, I'm going to put up Rosie's question, which was similar to Gillian's. You both asked almost the same question in the space of about 30 seconds. So Rosie asks, as a writer, do you find it easy or easier merging fictional characters with historical facts and background, or as genealogists do you try and put real people into relevant social history, but without using too much artistic license?
Yeah, Rosie, that's and Gillian as well. That is a fantastically important question. And it is something that goes completely to the heart of historical fiction. It's quite a big debate within the historical fiction community. My technique is this for fiction, that I do years of research before I go anywhere near a story, so that I have the map in my mind and the timeline of the real history. And I start earlier than I think I might need, and I go on later than I think I might need, because I want to be able to, at any moment, if someone asks me about Norman history, if somebody asks me about Cathar history, if someone asks me about Huguenot history, I want to be able to say, yes, this would have happened in this way, that would have happened in that way, regardless of whether I use that in the book. So if you like, I am wasteful with my time in that I research the entire thing before I know what I might use of it. There are other writers of historical fiction who go and research things they think they need, and that's it. So they don't have maybe quite such a depth of broad all-round historical knowledge. But that's because I love history, and also because I don't know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for inspiration in the real history. Once I've got that, if you like, my fiction is entirely imagined characters set against the backdrop of real history. So although real people do appear, they are never lead characters. I would never feel comfortable putting my imagined words in the mouths of people that have lived. So in the Huguenot series, for example, or Labyrinth, the Cathar series, when I have a real character like the Viscount of Carcassonne, Raymond Roger Trinquevel, when he speaks, it's because we have a record of that meeting that happened. Now, of course, it's not verbatim, and he would have been speaking in Occitan, and the transliteration won't be accurate and all of these things. But broadly speaking, I don't give imaginary conversation and ideas to real people. Some authors do it brilliantly, and they feel comfortable with that. The most obvious, I suppose, in the current day would be Hilary Mantel. But I would never do that. There's a wonderful saying from the brothers Goncourt, who were 19th century French writers, very famous. And it was something, I'm going to misquote it slightly, but it's something along the lines of, history is a novel that has been lived. A novel is history that might have been. So my characters, my imagined characters, are always women, men, everybody who could have lived, because I've done my research. So I know the sort of things that they would have thought and felt, and how they would have worshipped, and where they would have lived, and what they would have eaten, all of those kind of things. When I'm writing nonfiction, I use my own family history quite often as a starting point for that. So my previous work of history was called Warrior Queens and Quiet Revolutionaries, How Women Also Built the World. And I used as the spine for that, because it was essentially, the book is a question to myself of how is it that women are routinely and absolutely written out of history? Common sense tells us that the women were there, but yet they're invisible, because the historians have chosen not to foreground, or they sometimes neglect, or indeed there is a deliberate erasure. We are, I regret to say, living in a time where in Afghanistan we are seeing deliberate erasure of women. So sometimes it's a benign thing, sometimes it's forgetful, sometimes it is deliberate to not allow women's contributions to be seen. With that, but I felt I needed something more than that, than simply an essay about women in the law, women, and it's a book that mentions nearly 1,000 women from all periods of history, from all parts of the world, from all faiths, from all ethnicities, all of that. So I used my own research, to which, Findmypast was extremely helpful, into my great-grandmother, Lily Watson, who was a famous novelist in her day, Victorian novelist. She was one of Gladstone, the Prime Minister, Gladstone's favourite novelist, to the degree that when her most successful novel, The Vicar of Langthwaite, was published in the 1890s, he wrote an introduction to it. The Prime Minister wrote an introduction to her novel. She wrote 14 novels in all. She wrote a great deal of devotional work, verse. She wrote stories for children, and she was a correspondent for Girls' Own Paper. And she was a very comfortably off, middle-class woman of privilege living in London. She has completely disappeared. She doesn't appear in any biographies of Victorian literature. She doesn't appear online really anywhere. Although since the book came out, somebody has put a Wikipedia entry up for her, because I did a false Wikipedia entry and somebody took it and put it up, which was delightful. But my question was, if somebody like that, who actually had all the advantages, disappears, what about all the other women? So in that, and this is going back to Rosie and Gillian's questions, with that, I am very much putting a real person at the heart of a story. I am telling the story of my great-grandmother's birth, her childhood, her marriage, her later life and her death. And I'm using that as a way to shine a spotlight on other women. So I have a different technique, if you will, in non-fiction from the one that I use in fiction. And of course, my book that's coming out, which I hope everybody will really enjoy, called Feminist History for Every Day of the Year. It's illustrated. It's a, you know, been great joy to write. There's a lot of living people in there as well. But the point about that is essentially to say to young people in particular, this could be you. You could be this person that changes the world in this way or that way. And that these are very difficult times and it's very easy to be silenced. And I'm afraid there's a great tendency for people to self-censor these days for fear of causing offense. But actually, nobody who's ever changed the world, for the good or evil, I'm afraid, has ever held back. And the point is to say, be yourself. Look at all these incredible women, some of them in the past, some in the very far past, some of them living now, like Malala Yousafzai, of course, you know, is in the book. There are other people, you know, Simone Biles is in the book. Women who have achieved a great deal, have overcome quite a lot. But the bigger thing is to say, this is you. They aren't any different from you. The kings and the queens and all of those people, you know, they are different in some respects. But most women who do anything, it's because they believe there was something wrong or unjust or unfair, and they stood up to be counted. The only problem with the book is that since it went to print, and you had a copy that you held up just now, and here it is again, it's a gorgeous looking book, it's really lovely. Several things have already changed. So the key thing that there is a chapter called She Roars, She Scores, and that's about women in sport and how women and lots of lovely men have changed the narrative around women's and men's sport. And I talked about the triumph of the Lionesses in the Euros 2022. And now, literally after the book had gone to press, of course, they won again. Or indeed, there is the first female archbishop, was appointed a couple of weeks ago. So it's already, you know, things that I'm going to have to be updating when I do it. But it's been great fun writing it.
You are just going to have to do another volume.
Reprint. You all need to go buy this copy so I can reprint it. Yes, exactly.
Actually, I was flicking through this earlier, and I wanted to see who you had chosen for today's date, and I wondered if everybody would like to know who is the 22nd of August. You know, when you just double check, it is the 22nd.
It is the 22nd of August, but I can't remember, of course.
It is female pirate extraordinaire Anne Bonny.
Anne Bonny, wonderful. Well, there we are.
And look, fantastic illustrations there as well.
I know, lovely illustrations by Sophie Bass. And one of the Joubert family chronicles, The Ghost Ship, is essentially about queer pirates, and very much Anne Bonny's life was an inspiration for that in the series. So, I mean, what I imagine is almost everybody, when they pick up the book, will see who they share a birthday with.
Oh, I did that too.
Yeah. When's your birthday?
I don't think I'd heard of this lady. Hold on. Let me just.
Well, this is good, you see. This is the point of the book, is to share all these new names.
So my birthday is the 30th of September, and I got Zora Drift.
Ah, well, she's quite a controversial person, Zora Drift, because she was, what of course the French government called a terrorist, what the Algerian people would have said a freedom fighter. But I'm glad that you pointed her out, because this is a really big issue, and it's something to bear in mind for anybody who's facing tracing their family tree or doing their own genealogy and all of these things, is that when you are putting women back into history, which has obviously been part of my commitment, you have to put everybody back. You cannot only put in women you approve of or agree with.
You can't be selective, can you?
You cannot be selective, because otherwise it's not history. And you will find, many of you might have found this already, that you will come across people in your own family history that genuinely disappoint you or possibly even appall you. But the nature of telling the truth of our stories is to tell all of it, and also to understand that there will be people that did incredible things that also had some really awful ideas that you don't agree with. So Florence Nightingale is an incredible case in point. Extraordinary woman, determined, dogged, misrepresented by the press as a kind of passive, maternal, the lady with the lamp thing. That wasn't her character at all. She did amazing things within nursing, as of course did her contemporary Mary Seacole, and created something, the nursing profession, which actually was one of the very first opportunities for women to earn a living and work outside of the home without being either a governess or a nanny. In other words, in maternal roles, I suppose, even though nursing is a caring profession, but it was an extraordinary thing. She was also a brilliant statistician. I don't know if you know this, but Florence Nightingale is the person who invented the pie chart, strangely. I know.
No,
she was
I do not know that.
And all of her letters were about how frustrating it was to be a woman, how she wasn't allowed to do things. She also had views, a level of views, racist views, that were shocking even for the time. You know, people talked about, oh God, don't get Florence on that. So should she be, as the current language is, cancelled? Of course not. You push it all in, because women are complicated and contradictory, just like men are, and just like everybody else are. And without acknowledging nuance in research, without being brave enough to put all of it on the page, then we don't get the true story. And history,
We don't learn from it, do we?
No, we don't learn. And it must be the true story, not a sanitized version of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I had another point, but my brain works in such a way that things just fall out of my head very easily. However, I did also want to point out, on the same page as my birthday, on the opposite page, there's this fantastic quote from Julia Gillard, who we had the absolute honour of meeting at Women's Prize Live last year. I will read this to you. Everybody will probably know it. "I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man," which she said in the Australian Parliament.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Who wants to see what misogyny looks like? He needs a mirror, I think. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. Yeah, exactly. And we're doing a big fundraiser celebration for the Women's Prize in September. Maybe your lovely person could put that up in the box. It's at the Cadogan Hall, and I think it's the 23rd of Sunday, the 23rd of September. And it's a mixture of readings by women, poetry, and speeches. And that speech is going to be read in full.
Amazing. I want to just loop back very quickly because you spoke before about how when you want to write a book, you will research very heavily first,
Yes.
because, as you said earlier, it might be something that you know next to nothing about, and you feel like you need to go all in, get the big picture, because then I imagine that you then go in and hone in on what you want. But it was very interesting you said that, because there were a few people in our Facebook group, the Findmypast Family History Forum, who actually asked a little bit about this, and I just want to find it in my notes because I have it here somewhere. And it's relevant to what you said. It was, do you write a book because you've already done the research after being interested in a topic, or do you decide on a topic for a book and then go all out in researching it? And I guess you've already answered that question, which is fantastic.
Well, yes, but I just to amplify it, I would say, for me, I never think, oh, I would like to write a book about ... It's always more organic for me than that. It's about place. It was arriving in Carcassonne and finding this extraordinary history there. With the Joubert Family Chronicles, it was arriving in Franschhoek in South Africa and thinking, there's a Huguenot history here. That's extraordinary. With the Norman novel, it's a combination of knowing family history, but it's my childhood memories of seeing Mont Saint-Michel for the first time, and being in Normandy, in Brittany, in the 60s and the 70s, because that's where we tended to go. You know, we live on the south coast, so we just went across the other side of the channel for our holidays. And so for me, it's that. Whereas I do have friends, that Ken Follett, who is a wonderful writer of historical fiction as well, you know, he quite often thinks, I would like to write about this. So then he goes and researches it. Whereas it's always what I call, for me, it's the whispering in the landscape. It's being somewhere and hearing the voices going, there's a story here for you, Kate. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Goosebumps again. Shall we take another couple of questions? Because I have starred a few here. This is a question from William. As a writer, what is your trick to building up word count when you can write it in a small amount but want to expand to fill the book? So talking a little bit about like underwriting, I guess.
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, William, and I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. But I can tell you how I work. My husband actually has always said a book is as long as it needs to be. So although, of course, there are rules about this, you know, that if a full-length novel will be upward of 40,000 words. A novella is, you know, something between 50, you know, all of those kind of things. Of course, there are those kind of yardsticks. And also there are, you know, often in publishing, people say people don't want big books. And then, of course, a big book does well. And then everybody's doing big, you know, all of these things. But I think trying to free yourself from word count is a really important thing to do. Because what matters is the quality of the words you're using. It's not a numbers game. I have never set myself a daily word count, ever. I sit down and I write until I feel I've reached a natural place to stop that day. And that might mean a chapter of 1,800 words. It might be, if it's a really exciting chapter with a lot of jeopardy and momentum and all of those things, it might be 2,500 words. Another day, I might be working on a very delicate or difficult or even distressing scene to write, and I'll only write 600 words. But I never measure my achievement in terms of building the book up like that. I think in terms of, does this paragraph work? Does this chapter work? Have I finished it too soon, or do I need a little bit more? So I suppose what I'm saying is that I think listen to the book telling you what it needs. If, however, your question is essentially, you've got a really good idea, but when you've written it down, you realize you haven't got much story to it, or you haven't explained enough, then think of it as dropping a stone into a pool of water. That your original idea is the stone, and then everything that you build around it is the ripples that go out. So you might start on an ordinary day in an ordinary street. Let's just say Chichester, which is where I live. So a man is walking down North Street. You know that what matters is that this man has, let's say, just come out of prison, and you're about to tell the story of somebody who was wrongly convicted and has just got out and is now trying to reestablish his life. But you can't just write those things down, because then there is no story. So then you just step back a bit and you think of the man walking down the street, and then you start to put yourself inside his eyes, inside his head. So you will describe what he can see to the left. You will describe what he can see to the right. You will describe that at the top of the street is a market cross that is there, you know, it is very ancient and very old, and where all the youth of Chichester have always hung about and met. So in other words, think of it as colouring in, so that any scene that you write, which is very, very basic, you then just start to colour around the edges and let those ripples come out. And if that's kind of what you're asking about, how to build when you've kind of written it down, but there's not enough there, just do it that. Remember that you're like a filmmaker. Your responsibility is to put the entire world on the page so that the reader can see what you're seeing. And good luck with that. I mean, it's a really good tactic. You won't necessarily keep all of those descriptions. You won't necessarily keep all of those things in. But if you just start to think of it as world building, not just the story and the information, then quickly you'll find you've got the opposite problem, which is far too many words, not far too few.
I think that's a great answer. And just going back to what you said about word count as well, I used to be that sort of writer that would go, right, I want to do 1,500 words today, or I need to do 2,000 today. And I have been so much happier and also so much more productive when I just don't actually look at how many words I write. Trust
the book. Let your book tell you what it needs. You know, it sounds a very airy-fairy thing to say, but once you start doing it, you'll go, oh, yes, of course. It doesn't matter how many words I wrote today. it matters that I got them right.
Exactly. We did have a couple of questions about sort of like research and research advice. I wondered if I could put some of those to you. We had a few questions in the forum, there were three people. So there were Leslie, Pad and Peggy, who were all a little bit stuck in their family history research. So I think just to, in the interest of time, when you are stuck in your research and you hit what these family historians will call a brick wall, what do? Do you have any advice for people who hit this, whether it's for family history or whether it's just general historical research?
I would say go round the back. Now, what I mean by that is that family historical research is very rarely easily linear, and particularly when you add women's invisibility, you know, the 38 million missing from family trees, into the mix as well. You cannot think that you will start a day and go all the way through the letters of the alphabet and arrive at Z, and then you will have done the whole thing. You're like a magpie, you're like a detective. So if you hit a brick wall, then you have to go, okay, I'm stopping here. I'm now going to go turn right and go up the side. You know, for those who are my age and women, although there might be some lovely men who've read this as well, I always think of it as The Secret Garden, this wonderful novel by Frances Hodgson Burnett, you know, great Victorian classic, but more in terms of, you imagine a secret walled garden. You might enter at the door in the southwest corner. And because of that, the vista and what you see will be a very particular thing. But if you had entered the door at the east, you would be seeing a very different garden and a very different view. So when you're doing research, if you get that, you know, you find there and you've hit the brick wall, then you need to step out and come at it from another angle. And there are many, many different ways of doing this. So if you know that your family were living in this particular place and you now can't find anything more about them, but you might be able to go, and of course, again, Findmypast can help with this and local libraries can help with this, go to a newspaper archive and do some research into that town at that time, because you might discover that your Auntie Florence is mentioned in the WI Flower Show. You've come into a brick wall from your family research, but she is still in the world elsewhere. And that is the way, you know, it is very much just like building up a picture. So you've got a little bit more information. Oh, that's interesting. So Auntie Florence was doing this at this moment. And that is the only way to do it, to not get downcast when you hit a brick wall. Know that there will always be another way to come in at the story from another angle.
I couldn't have put it better. That's a fantastic answer. There's a colleague of mine, Jen, I can't remember if you've met her or not, but she's our...
Yeah, no, I've worked with Jen. She's fantastic.
You have worked with Jen. She is our, for anybody who doesn't know, she is our research specialist at Findmypast. She's amazing. And she is a big fan of what is called fan research. So that's your friends, associates and neighbours. So it's exactly what Kate was just saying. If you've come in from one door into this bit of family history and you've hit that wall, just go and try another door. There's quite a few that you can try. And the social history angle of it as well is so important. But yeah, fantastic answer. Thank you so much. I want to put this on screen. Rosie said this is probably the best and most encouraging advice on writing I've ever heard. I'm really enjoying this.
Thank you, Rosie. I am too.
Now we have about 10 minutes left and I have lots of other questions of my own, but I'm going to try and sort of see if there's any I can merge with your questions. So bear with me just a second. Let me just see if I had any more pre-submitted ones. Oh, we have a question from Grace on Instagram. How did you come up with the story in The Taxidermist's Daughter?
Thank you, Grace. Those of you who have not read The Taxidermist's Daughter, a quick précis. It's set in 1912, which was until 2012 the wettest spring on record. It's set in Fishbourne, where I grew up, which is just outside Chichester, which is where I'm talking to everybody from now, which is a Roman and then a Norman and then a Georgian city, market town city, but it's called a city because we have a cathedral, but it's very small. And it is the story of a young woman who lives in an isolated house on the marshes. It's a gothic horror story involving taxidermy. So I will not say any more. If you think of Frankenstein meets Daphne du Maurier's The Birds, you are in the right kind of ballpark. But it's also a story about revenge and about what women can do if they have been wronged, but the people who have, well, it's rather topical, sadly, the people to whom they should go for help are actually the people who are doing the terrible things in the first place. And the reason I came up with it, Grace, is because firstly, it was just raining and raining and raining and raining and raining. And things were flooding and there were accidents and people were losing livestock and all of these things locally. So it was very much in my mind about the power of water. And of course, extreme weather has only got worse and worse and worse since then. But secondly, when I was a girl growing up in Sussex, there was a very famous taxidermy museum in a place called Arundel, another cathedral city not far away. And I was obsessed with this museum. And I was interested in the fact that taxidermy was, if you like, one of the most important working class crafts. And because it was a craft, it wasn't really ever given the respect it deserved. But it was very fundamental to Victorian society. But I also learned this extraordinary thing that women weren't allowed to be taxidermists. You thought, why? I mean, it was just the most bizarre thing. So when you add all of that into the mix, a creepy taxidermy museum, a terrible conspiracy that's going on, a young woman to whom something terrible has happened, but she can't remember what, and the endless rain, it is a gothic horror story in a way, in the mold of Frankenstein. And at the heart of it is the question, is it ever right to take justice into your own hands? And I adapted it for the stage for Chichester Festival Theatre in 2023. And that was an extraordinary thing to see it brought to life on stage. And with my Norman novel, the English area, the English setting is Fishbourne and Bosham. It is the same marshlands that I put on the page in Taxidermist Daughters. So any of you who've loved that, you will like the English side of it when you read it.
Very nice. Fantastic. I wanted to ask a little bit, and I think everybody listening will be interested in this anyway, sort of what your top tips are for research generally, anything about your processes, and this links in quite nicely to Daphne's question, which is, do you use a lot of post-it notes?
Daphne, I hate to admit this, but I don't use any post-it notes. And the reason for that is that my experience is that they're never as sticky as they promise to be. They fall off. You can't find the key one. I write endless notes. Just where I am here talking to you, I have 4 different notebooks all around the place at the moment, all semi on the go, because I find the process of handwriting notes when I'm researching incredibly important. We all know when you type, it homogenizes the text. And therefore, you don't have a visual aid because everything kind of looks the same. For me, the good old trusty notebook and pen. So when I'm researching, that's what I do. I then do type notes up later, but post-it notes, no, they have a life of their own and they vanish. You can't find them. But notebooks, I'm surrounded, on the lower shelf below here is all notebooks of my past work. My top tips for research, and they're oddly, almost sounds contradictory, but it's about the timing of it, is the first and most important thing I would say is to go in with an open mind. That for me, thinking, oh, I must find out about ... is never as effective as I must find out everything that I can. Being curious about everything. That if you like, that no piece of research that you would do in the early stages of your research, this is the key thing, will be wasted. However, when you get further down the line into your research, and certainly towards the point that you were, if you're me, about to start writing the book, then you have to become more disciplined, because it's very easy to become seduced by research. And if you're a historical writer like me, thinking, oh, I do want to start writing this novel, but I just need to do a little bit more investigation about men's shoe buckles, for example. You don't at that moment. But nothing is wasted in the early time, because it's about your familiarity with the subject, the familiarity with the world. Just reading, I've used it many times already, but the key word is curiosity. But be systematic in how you write things down. So the reason I have lots and lots and lots of different notebooks is that I have some notebooks where I put quotations in, and and I think, well, I might never know, I might quote from that letter, so I'm going to write that down there. There are others that are about what people eat, what they wear, what kind of things they might believe. So in terms of, if you're looking in the Tudor period or whatever, or certainly the medieval period, things about religion, things about relationships between men and women, things about marriage, all of this kind of stuff, so that you can do every bit of research you want, but you are quite methodical in how you record it, so that when you want to find something, you can find it. Because otherwise you're sitting there flipping through page after page, thousands of pages, possibly, certainly tens of thousands of words, and you can never find anything ever again. So that is frustrating. And everything that you find out, make a note of its provenance, because that's the other thing, particularly if you're writing non-fiction as opposed to fiction, where you might have some footnotes or somebody might challenge you, I suppose. You want to be able to say, oh, I read that in the archive in Toulouse. It's this folder, this blah, blah, blah. So don't think that you'll remember, so in other words, write everything down. The more you discover, the more it will crystallize, but the less you'll be able to kind of verify it. And that ability to be able to go, oh no, I know that that's right because I got it from this source. And of course, the key piece of information is never believe AI, never believe AI. And Wikipedia is fine up to a point, but never use Wikipedia without verifying it from a proper source, because it's a lovely idea, the idea that everybody is putting their own stuff up there, but a lot of it is not accurate. When I was researching my own family history for my great-grandmother, I had a family tree, and I was looking and I was thinking, but she wasn't born in that year, because human beings and families make mistakes. So in other words, verify, never take something at face value. You must go back to the source. You must justify it. You must confirm it from other sources. So I think that's the key piece of research. Even with family history, don't trust that your uncle got it right. You need to, go to the archives, get the death certificates, get the marriage certificate, and you'll discover that everybody just assumed that this marriage had happened in the spring, and then it always was talked about as happening in the spring, but actually it happened in the December before. It's things like that. So verify, verify, verify.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we need all of those, like on a front of a notebook, I guess.
Absolutely.
Advice. Yes. On a t-shirt, but then I won't be able to see it. So maybe on the cover of a
notebook.
Yeah,
you won't be able to see it. So
exactly. Just very briefly, I just want to come back to what you said about curiosity and allowing yourself that curiosity to just go and try and find that big picture thing and not try and find anything specific. We sometimes talk here in the sort of Findmypast online community about allowing yourself to fall down that research rabbit hole, and giving yourself the freedom to do that at the beginning, rather than restricting yourself. Because I sometimes think if you go in with that narrow view, you're going to miss things on either side,
exactly.
Aren't you? Right, we have a minute left. Okay, my final question is one from me, but I think, as I said, everybody will enjoy this question. If there were 3 women, whether they're from the new book or not, that you would like our audience to go and look up immediately after this finishes, who would they be?
Oh God, well that's very difficult, isn't it? Because there are so many extraordinary people. I think, it's going to be impossible to 3 women.
But it's a cruel question.
It's a cruel question. It's a very, very cruel question. But I would say there are just a couple of fun women. So one is a woman called Cthulhu, who was a Mongolian princess in the 13th century, about the time of Labyrinth, but in obviously Mongolia. And we don't really know much about her from history, except we know she existed because Marco Polo wrote about her, and the great Persian scholar Rashid al-Din also wrote about her. And she was the kind of beloved daughter of a man who was one of the descendants of Genghis Khan, and the kingdom was splintering. And he had sons, but she was the one that he trusted, and he wanted her to be named the Grand Khan, and that didn't happen. And she was supposed to be married, and she said she would marry, provided the man could beat her in a wrestling competition. And now this isn't quite as weird as it sounds, because wrestling is the national sport for women as well as men in Mongolia. And that if she won, then he would have to give her 100 horses. Some stories say 1,000 horses. And all we know about her is that she did have a huge herd of horses, the largest herd of horses that anybody knows. But what I love about Catullun's story is that this is the way that history can distort. That there was years later, there was an opera that most people will have heard of called Turandot by Puccini. And the story of Turandot, who is a princess, who is a stroppy madam who sits on a cushion, setting her suitors tasks to do it. It's not wrestling anymore. And it's based on a story about a Chinese princess. So if you like, there's been these rumors all the way through history that have ended up with Puccini in 1909, I think it was, writing Turandot. But Turandot is essentially Catullun. So I love that story, that a real woman of history has kind of been memorialized in a piece of art. In feminist history for every day of the year, we'll find many extraordinary people who changed the world. Pauli Murray would be another I would mention. In the 1940s, she was a freedom rider. That's to say, a black person who rode in the wrong part of the bus in Jim Crow America, where black people were second-class citizens. 15 years before Rosa Parks, who everybody knows. But she was seen as a complicated character, as a figurehead for the civil rights movement, because she described herself as an in-betweener, what today we would call probably a non-binary person. And she, when she was arrested, reacted by, when she was released from jail, going to law school. Much of America's laws about civil rights were written by Pauli Murray. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the great American judge whose death has had such a catastrophic effect on the position of women in America, said that everything that she had ever learned, she had learned from Pauli Murray. And Pauli Murray became an Episcopalian priest at the end of her life. And she has one of the best sayings I've ever come across that she says in her autobiography. And she was an activist and a campaigner for justice and fairness all of her life. And she said, "I have lived to see my lost causes found." History catches up. So that's a wonderful thing. So those are two from the book. And the final one, who actually is just a funny thing, but I think everybody will appreciate the humor of this, is that in Chicago in the late 19th century, a woman called Josephine Cochran was clearly very fed up with nobody clearing up after themselves. And she went to a shed at the end of her garden and she said, "I suppose if no one else is going to invent a dishwashing machine, I had better do it myself." So ladies and gentlemen, the dishwasher was invented by a very pissed off Chicago housewife called Josephine Cochran back in the 1890s. And it's pretty much the model that we have today.
I love that. And also something I didn't know. Kate, this has been a dream of a session. You've been a dream of a guest. I cannot get over that I've been able to talk to you for an hour. For anybody who is looking to order Kate's new book, it's coming out in September. Feminist History for Every Day of the Year. Liam
pre-order it now, though. It's available to order now.
Yeah. Yeah, you can order that. There's a link in the description. There's also a link in, it's one in the comments, there's one in the description. And you can also get the final book in the Joubert Family Chronicles in paperback now as well. Complete your set. I can't believe that's been an hour already. I had so much else I wanted to ask you. I think everybody else had so much else they wanted to ask you. They have said that they would like you to come back, and so would I. I just want to say how grateful I am that you've taken the time out of your busy schedule to come in and chat to us. Thank you so much. Any closing remarks or thoughts before we head off?
The only thing to say is that every single one of your stories that you're researching matters. That real history is the history of all of us, It's not just the people that we might think of as making history. And if our stories are not there, then there is no depth or context to all the other things that we do read about in the history books or we see on the news. So the work that you are all doing in putting your own families back into a broader public gaze matters just as much. So good luck with it and keep at it.
Thank you so much. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. We will hopefully see you again soon. Have a lovely long bank holiday weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.